Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone's been enjoying themselves today. As mentioned, did an architecture degree at Melbourne University. Okay, and I have been invited to talk with you. I understand that you're looking at design build projects, and that's something that I've been involved in for many years. I was asked to write a chapter for this design build studio booklet that was produced by Tolya Stonarov from Norwich University in the US. And writing this chapter made me think more closely about the methodologies that we use in our teaching. And clearly, you know, there's a real interest in this design build idea, and Tolya was very keen on me writing about this particular project that we've been doing. This was done in 2011 in a remote part of Australia, right out in the desert area. And it was for an Aboriginal community that were very interested in trying to improve the learning outcomes for their youth. And so it was partnership with an education faculty at Melbourne University. And I took a group of 12 students to build this facility, and we did it in about 2 weeks, and we worked with a local work team as well. Because it was so remote, all of the materials were packed into a series of shipping containers, and they were transported. It's about 4,000 kilometres from Melbourne out into the desert, and it was essentially assembled like a big kit of parts. It worked really well. The community were really happy with it. It's still a project that is highly utilised, and that was the one that I wrote about in that book. But the idea was to talk about design build, and I realised that from my previous experience doing my PhD that it's not just design build. That it's important to make sure beforehand that you've done the right research before you're actually doing the design and build. Without that research, you're going to be putting together a failed project, I'm sure. So it really is research, design and build. And then, of course, you've got to be speaking with your clients and making sure that the consultation phase is really strong as well. This is an image of one of my students working with a family in the Northern Territory of Australia. It was housing that is in such poor condition that even the government's prepared to call them chicken coop houses. And we had a team of students working for 2 weeks, and we renovated one of these houses. But beforehand, you had to do a proper consultation. So what I've learned here is it's much more complex than just design build. The research component is really strong as well. This is the image of us undertaking consultation with one of the families we did a house renovation with. That was the inside of the house. Top left is outside, bottom right is what we did to improve it. Of course, the consultation is an important part of this design build work as well. This is the image of one of the community elders looking through the booklets that the students have presented. So the students aren't doing their design work until after they've done the building and the consultation. And of course, engagement is a really important part of this process as well. Here we have an image showing the local work teams that work alongside my students. So I've got my dozen students, and we'll have a group of anything between 5 and 20 local workers that will participate as well. And the important part for them is it's an employment component as well. So that we start to see the design build is also supported by research and consultation and engagement and employment as well. This is one of the projects we completed in 2010, and this was in an Aboriginal community in the northern part of Australia where people need access to computers for a whole lot of reasons now, and also the children need somewhere safe to do their homework at the end of the day. So they'll call media boxes, but they're computer and homework facilities, and also offices for the leaders of the communities. But what I realised by writing that chapter is that the design build idea is way too simplistic to look at it. There is also the research and consultation and all of those sorts of things that happen in parallel with the other projects. So it's not a linear project, it's not a linear process at all. But also the other day I realised when I was asked to do a presentation to a lot of the engagement people at the university, there's also a whole other layer of work behind the scenes that goes into these projects. From administration, publishing, marketing, there's pedagogy, and you're always looking at how you can fund this project thing. So it's a whole administrative level that works for all of this. And the way that I look at this nowadays, I was asked one time to do a diagram of how the projects are put together. And it's supposed to be on A4 sheet of paper and everything. And I tried doing all of these different ways of showing the process that we go through. But the reality is that all of the diagrams that I put together were also flawed. But then I came across my partner wearing a bracelet of this type, and I made me realise this is a much more practical and also, for me, a more understandable way of understanding how all of these networks work and the projects come together with all of the community groups. And if anyone's read Deleuze the Guitar work, and it's not the easiest thing that you ever could read, but this rhizomatic nature seems to reflect my understanding of these projects much more accurately. I've looked at recently and realised that the projects that we do get into three broad themes. And the first one of these is health hardware that we do in Papua New Guinea. The second is looking at Indigenous housing, and we've got a program that we've put together called Homes Plus around that. There's also the arts culture sector we're working on as well. And I'll just quickly go through each of these if we have time. The first one is the PNG hardware. We've been working there since 2010. We do a building project there every second year, and in the intervening years we continue our research project. So this is a community on the coast in Lae. The blue is obviously the border. There's a river coming down from the highlands and it goes out into the coast, which is the the bottom of the diagram there. This image shows when we first began the community, you can see all the houses there, but the circles are locating the pit toilets that were along the coast. So there's no running water or whatever. People are relying on pit toilets for ablutions. And this is what the pit toilets look like. They're just sort of knocked together. People dig a big hole in the ground. They often put like a couple of 44-gallon drums in it and then backfill around the outside of that, and then people are pooing into these. And of course the problem is, now that we've got issues of global warming and sea level rise and things, that this is the sort of levels that we're looking at, that the people in the community are starting to grapple at the moment. And that means that the pit toilets, when you get the high tides and the flooding and things, that the poo that is inside the pit toilets gets flooded right throughout the community with massive health implications. There are lots of people dying from all sorts of diseases that contribute to this kind of problem. So what we've been doing is building composting toilets that are raised above the ground, and the poo is kept in two tanks. So one is used for 6 months and then it's tapped off, and then you start pooing in the other tank. In the meantime, the first tank sort of dehydrates away, and the quantity of waste at the end of that is actually quite minor. So these toilets were built in 2012, and we went back. We built another set in a community on the northern part of PNG. We went back to this community in 2016 and built another set of them as well. They work quite well. You're really happy to use them. They're much nicer to use than the pit toilets, and they haven't had so much of the the health problems recently. One of the things I'm really keen about is making sure that the skills transfer is really worked well through, so that the community is able to continue using skills they develop with us into later projects as well. So the first time we had prepared to do 80% of the work, second time 50%, and as the time goes on working with them, it gets to the point that we can become redundant from our projects, which is always something to be very happy about. And that's something that we've been doing in New Guinea. We're struggling to be able to do in communities in Australia. The second is that we're looking at is Indigenous home ownership. In this one, most Indigenous people in remote Australia are living in settlements that are fully financed from the government. And the housing on average costs about, a 3-bedroom house costs about 800,000 Australian dollars, which is probably about 600,000 US dollars. I'm not too sure how that works with Canadian dollars. Very, very expensive houses. There's always a need for Indigenous buy-in to these houses, and it's something the government isn't taking responsibility for. And so we've put together a catalogue, and this is sort of what it looks like. If you can see that, I'm holding it up. It's set up like an IKEA catalogue, and it means that people can select items to add on to improve houses as well. Carports, sporting things, screens, fences, all of those sorts of things that the government housing tends not to put funds into. And so therefore the insides of it is, influenced by the IKEA catalogue. It's got the price, how long it takes to build, what materials you need, what comes in the kit of parts. And that's something that one of the projects that we've been working on and is becoming quite popular in communities. So we've done it, there's bus shelters, other shelters, outdoor kitchens, outdoor living spaces, because the reality is that the way that houses are being designed in Australia, it's not reflecting the patterns of living that people have. And so this is our attempt to make the housing more relevant for communities' needs. And the last one is looking at arts culture centres in Australia. This is working with a communities again in remote parts of Australia. There isn't many employment or sustainable employment opportunities in these communities, except for, in my opinion, in arts and culture production and sharing. And these communities are desperate for government-funded arts centres, and we've been asked by 2 communities to help design their culture centres, arts culture centres. But the process that we're working through is to do a series of entree, smaller projects before we get to the larger project. And that means that we're building the relationship with communities and checking out the capacities in communities and making sure that the design actually reflects the aspirations of the communities. So we're going to spend about 3 to 4 years doing these smaller projects before we commit to the design for the larger multi-million-dollar projects. So this is a series of pavilions that we built along the Wakefield walk-off trail. You can look up our website for more information, but basically the Aboriginal land was stolen from them by the British. The British ran big cattle farms through and really disrupted the local living, nomadic living patterns, so that the Aboriginal people were essentially forced to work on the cattle stations for no pay. And they would get paid just in occasional bits of food or tobacco. So this community went on strike 50 years ago. They were on strike for 8 years, and they walked off from as part of their stroke, they walked off from this cattle station along this 22-kilometre pathway, and we were asked if we could build a series of pavilions along this pathway to talk about and to make sure that this story is kept into the future. So we built 3 pavilions along this walkway, each of them reflecting the stories of each of the locations. And this is helping us understand the best way to work with the community and build trust and understanding for the projects that are coming in years to come. And the other one is that the Wadair community, this larger pavilion was built as a club for selling alcohol, and the women in the community got very unhappy with this after many, many years, and they paid someone to bulldoze out all of the inside below the pavilion. And we were asked if we would go back and start thinking about how this precinct can actually be put together. There's a huge repository of artifacts, but also photographs, and people are really, really keen to engage with that kind of history, and there was no way that could happen. So we did this media box project, which is a shipping container underneath the old pavilion, a really big screen, a projector inside, the seating around the outside, so all of these films and photographs things could be projected onto the screen and start the conversation with the people about how the later culture centre would actually manifest itself. So it's really a way of provoking conversation and discussion before we can, as a step towards, getting a full design for the schemes. So that we're going back to each of these communities and doing these small-scale entree projects over the next couple of years before we launch into the bigger projects, the actual arts culture sector. And it's going to take time to get the design right, but it's also going to take time to get the funding processes in place. So that's a snapshot of where we've been, and I'd be pretty happy to hear where everyone else is at, the other people that have presented today as well. So thanks for your time. Sorry about the technical hitches.